I'd like to introduce to you someone who is already familiar to you. Brenda Mann is a longtime friend of Calvary Baptist. We saw her here in a video message just a couple of weeks ago, bringing greetings on the occasion of our 140th anniversary. Brenda and her husband Ralph served in ministry at Calvary from 1981 to 1987, and you can see a picture of them in the hallway just outside the friendship room. And there's another picture down at the bottom of the stairs by the front door of Ralph and Don Tapscott, turning the sod for the beginning of construction of the new addition, which isn't so new anymore, but it was. Brenda shared her talents and skills well beyond this church. She served many years on the executive of the CBOQ and represented them on the Human Trafficking in Canada Working Group as part of the Canadian Council of Churches. Brenda was the executive director of the CBWOQ from 2006 to 2014, where she continues to be an active member. And we're happy to welcome you back to Calvary once again to share the message with us this morning.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here and to see you. It's hard to believe it's been, I think, 38 years since we left here. That's why we look a lot younger in that picture out there. So this morning, I just have a few things that I'd like to share with you, and I hope God will open your hearts to what you need to hear and mine as well. So no matter what our age or stage in life, we are all on a journey. In an ideal world, hopefully our paths will be nice and smooth, but I know we all have humps and hollows along the way. When I think of the younger kids, maybe my grandchildren and yours, they just relish each new day. They don't worry too much about the future. Just keep them fed, loved, give them some time with their family and their friends, and maybe a bit of screen time, and they're set. No worries. And then as they get a little older, moving up to their teenage years, thinking about high school and then university, they have a lot more decisions to make about their future and what direction they're going to head. Hopefully with family and friends to listen and encourage them on, they'll make good choices, and they will have many great adventures in their lives. So then, remember when we got through that post-secondary, whatever it was, we hit adulthood real hard. Perhaps we maybe got married, had children, got our own jobs, many relationships, and then worked for likely a number of decades until it was time for looking at the freedom of retirement. Then once you've retired, you got to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with the next stage of our life? There'll likely be a few issues to deal with, and we hope we never have to make some of them, but it's life. Things come the way they are. With all of our journeys, we've got ups and downs. And it's not always the way we thought it would be, but, we've got pretty good lives. Like some of you, I'm trying to figure out the post-retirement journey. My house has gotten a lot quieter since January, when my husband Ralph passed away. After 45 years of marriage and all that entails, things do seem pretty different. And he wasn't a noisy guy, but man, it's quiet now. In working through lots of thoughts and issues and plans, I am convinced now more than ever that God is still with us, and He has things for us all to do in His perfect timing. When we think that our life situation is maybe a bit hard to handle and we can't do anything for God, we are reminded that He still has work for us to do, and that He will be with us in all of that. When we heard the beatitudes being read this morning, we know that Jesus was sharing and teaching His disciples that He will always be with us in a variety of situations. He talks about those who are poor in spirit, or those who mourn, those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness, those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, those who are peacemakers, those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And at the ending, I love the version that was used. We are blessed when people insult us for how we've lived our lives, because they just don't know any better. But God will be with us through all of that. So as I've been thinking about life and what people have gone through, I was drawn to stories that were familiar in the Bible to me. And then as I started researching them, I found new things. You think when you're this age, you remember the stories pretty well. But there's a few things that I learned, and I'll share some of that with you. So I'm going to just highlight a few people and see if their experiences will help you and me find direction in our lives. So I figured we should start with Adam and Eve. Their world was ideal. Everything going pretty great. Until their quest for ultimate knowledge led them away from God's plan. You know, he never forces us to follow his plan. He lets us do things our own way. We're always wise if we do follow his plan. But Adam and Eve found out that they did not follow his plan, and you know that they were put out of the Garden of Eden. And they lived the best they could, but life was a lot tougher for them. Eventually, Eve had 4 sons: Cain, Abel, Enoch, and Seth. And then her husband Adam died at age 930. We think we have a tough time getting through, hopefully to 100, but back in those days, it was into the hundreds of years. About 9 generations after Adam, we get to Noah. So with most people living 800 or 900 years, that's a lot of years to go by to get 9 generations. There was so much corruption on the earth that God decided to get rid of everyone except Noah and his family, his 3 sons and their wives, and he and his wife. And he was 600 years old when he got everybody loaded onto the ark. That's quite an age. And he actually lived another 350 years after that. So the sins of Adam and Eve got us kind of off to a bad start, but God still worked through them, brought family and brought people who would follow him. And then Noah came, good family. And I wonder if Adam might have said to God, "We've muffed up big time. Can you still use us?" I don't know, maybe you and I can say that too. So God did use Noah and his family, and he gave us all a fresh start. But what God asked of Noah really did seem impossible. Can you imagine all the neighbors watching as he built this huge boat on dry land, far away from water? God gave him the instructions of exactly how to build it and all the animals and how much food. It must have been quite a feat. And then once he had them all loaded on the ark, God gave them 7 days and the rain started. And the earth was flooded. And so because of Noah listening to God's voice and doing what he did, we're all here today. So, do the unimaginable if God directs. Noah and his wife and their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, after the flood, their families grew and grew and grew. The world starting to be populated again. And each of those 3 sons had many descendants. You can read all about it in Genesis. And they all spoke together. They were having the time of their lives. They were doing great. And they decided, let's build a city with a tower so high. And we'll make it out of bricks and tar. And remember the Tower of Babel? Well, God looked down and said, they're getting pretty smart thinking that they can just plan the whole world. So he decided, if they can do all this while they're speaking the same language, what I need to do something about this. So you know that he gave them all different languages and they scattered. And so they weren't ready to take over the world then on their own. Now, one of those three sons was Shem. And if you now go another 9 generations after him, you get to Abram. And I think I noticed after the flood, people didn't live quite as long. So Abraham was 75 years old, pretty good age, when God told him he was going to be the father of many nations. And God changed his name from Abram to Abraham. So he told them, you are going to be the father of many nations. And he's 100, and his wife's a bit younger, but how long did they have to wait before God fulfilled that? I'd forgotten this part. It was almost 25 years. They lived day to day thinking, she's going to get pregnant soon, she's going to get pregnant soon, she's going to get pregnant soon. And so eventually, she kind of gave up and decided to give her maidservant to her husband so he could finally have a child. So then years later, at age 99, God reminded Abraham, remember that promise I gave you 24 years ago? You are going to have a son, you and your wife. And so when Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90, they had their son Isaac. So what can we take away from this? Be patient with God's timing. We don't know. God's timing is not the same as ours. Sometimes we think it should move faster, and sometimes we think it should slow down. So those are just a few people from the Old Testament that I thought gave me some guidance. And I turned my thoughts to the New Testament. I always think of Mary, the mother of Jesus. I can't imagine what it must have been like for her. She was a young girl, like maybe 12 or 13, some age like that, 14. And she was pregnant by God's Spirit. She knew that she hadn't done anything to cause this pregnancy. She wondered what her fiancé would say, Joseph, but God also had prepared him, so he knew it was okay. I'm sure she talked to her mom and dad about it and explained to them what she could explain, what she knew. But can you imagine the gossip in the town, the people around, people at church? Like, what's going on? Likely few others would believe her story, except maybe for her cousin Elizabeth, because she was amazingly pregnant as well with who would be Jesus' cousin. So Mary went to stay with Elizabeth. I thought that was pretty wise. Get away from the gossip in the town and have someone who understands and you can be together with. So sometimes I think God takes us out of a situation, but he brings us to someone, or he helps us find someone that we can trust and relate to. So I think from that we can learn, find someone with a like mind. So Mary and Joseph have their baby Jesus, and he grows up. He lives with his family. He learns the carpentry trade from his father Joseph. I bet he was a really good son. I have a feeling. I don't think he'd be a difficult child, but I don't know. And then by the time he's 30, it's time for his public ministry to begin. He has a lot to accomplish, and he knows it would be good to train up some others to follow and to help him. And so he chooses his 12 disciples. So 4 of those disciples we don't hear a whole lot about in the Bible. So Philip, Bartholomew, James, and Thaddeus. But the rest come with a bit of history. Can you imagine 4 rugged fishermen coming in off the boats? There were 2 sets of 2 brothers, Peter and Andrew, and then James and John. And Jesus called them the sons of thunder due to their fiery personalities. So can you just kind of picture that? Then there was Matthew, who was the tax collector for Rome, and I imagine he wasn't too well liked by the community. He would really be considered a traitor in their eyes. And then there was Simon, a political activist. He's going to get out there and, do his thing. And then there's the skeptic, doubting Thomas. Can you imagine living all together, those 12 disciples and Jesus, and there would be others in the community that joined them, but living together 24/7 with all those different personalities and their ways? I think there would be a lot of opportunity for some internal tension in those situations. But it's been said that Jesus chose them not because they were educated or didn't have an education, for their social standing, or for their lack of flaws. He chose them for their willingness to follow him. He trained these imperfect, ordinary men to become the pioneering leaders that would spread the gospel and establish the early Christian church. So what can we learn from this? I'd say God can bring a cast of characters together to do amazing things in his plan. So Jesus and his crew of followers spread the good news for 3 years. It seemed all too soon for Jesus' earthly life to be done, but he died a cruel death by crucifixion. He's buried, and then 3 days, we all know, miraculously comes back to life. And his resurrection is part of his amazing plan for you and me and for our whole world. So we need to be open to God's miraculous plan in our lives. My last reference is from the life of Paul. We first hear about him being called Saul, the persecutor of Christians. And I, maybe like some of you, figured his name was changed to Paul right after his conversion on the road to Damascus. In my mind, that's where it happened. But looking it up, I found out that Saul was Jewish and a Roman citizen. And so people who had both of those had 2 names. They had a Hebrew name and a Latin name. So his Hebrew name was Saul and his Latin name was Paul. So sometime after his conversion, when he's out doing his missionary work, he was working a lot amongst the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people. So he decided to use his Latin name, Paul, that would be more familiar to the people that he was connecting with. And I was reminded that it isn't until after Acts 13, verse 9 in the Bible, that he is then almost always referred to as Paul. So what we've learned from this is God can use anyone, even the most unlikely. So these examples give me both a challenge and they give me courage. We can make really big mistakes, like Adam and Eve or Saul, but God will turn things around in his time. No matter what anyone's background or situation is, anybody, think of maybe the most unlikely person in your mind that will come to God. God can use that person when they open themselves up to his Spirit. Then think about how God might be asking you to do something. Even the most ridiculous thing like building an ark on top of dry land. Or God can change people's languages so they can understand each other. If it's in God's plan, it can happen. God can bring new life into this world in the most miraculous ways, like he did with Sarah and Elizabeth and Mary. And that reminds me that we need to be supportive of people who face challenging times. Very challenging if people aren't able to have a child. People that have a child that has a challenge or disability. People that are just earning to have a family. We need to be there for them. Which reminds me that God uses the most unlikely people, like you and me, to fulfill his plan. He doesn't call us to be comfortable. He calls us to be faithful. We shouldn't elevate our own human abilities, but if we doubt our value and don't try to do what God has asked us to do, we rob others of how God wants to use us and serve him. In the Beatitudes, it closes with Jesus saying, "Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven." So today, it's a new day for us all. No matter our age, our abilities, or our circumstances, if we ask God for wisdom and direction, you will figure it out. Exactly where will we go from here?